Hey guys, welcome to Unit 12. Unit 12, we're going to have a look at the digestive system. We're going to look mostly at the anatomy, and then towards the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the physiology. So let's get started. So we always start, of course, with the function of this particular system. And the digestive system functions to, well, digest food materials that we eat. Then, of course, once we get those broken down into smaller pieces, we need to absorb the nutrients that comes from that food. Make sure that can get into the blood so it can be transported around the body. And then, of course, there's going to be waste products, and we need to get rid of that. So the three functions are going to be digestion, absorption, and elimination. Now, this system is a little bit different than some of the ones we've studied because this system has a tract, which means it's a one-way tube. Starts at the mouth, of course, and it goes right through to the anus. So each one of these functions is carried out at a different spot along that digestive tract. Now let's start with a little bit of microanatomy before we get into the bigger parts. This theme that we're going to talk about here now, these four primary tissue layers, is going to be similar for almost all organs in the digestive tract. Maybe a little bit different here and there, but for the most part, this remains true. So when we look at the inside of an organ, the empty place in the inside is generally called the lumen. So in this case here, if we think about the way this is ordered, this mucous membrane, this is going to be the closest part to the lumen. So the mucous membrane is what's actually going to come in contact with their food that we eat. So we've got a mucous membrane, and this is going to be a layer of epithelial cells. And there's going to be a lot of cells there that secrete mucus and a whole bunch of other things that end up getting pushed into or released into the lumen of the organ, which will help with digestion and absorption. Now, right behind that mucous membrane, we're going to have a submucosa. This layer is going to be a lot of blood vessels there. That's going to help in our absorption. It's also going to help bring oxygen and to the cells there so they can carry out their functions. There's also going to be some nerves there in that layer that's going to help regulate digestion. Behind that, we're going to have some layers of smooth muscle. Now these are going to be, of course, involuntary muscle fibers that are going to help move food through the digestive system. And they have these rhythmic contractions that we call peristalsis. So peristalsis is when the muscles contract and it pushes food from starting at the esophagus, through the stomach, then the small intestines, large intestine, and out through the anus. And then on the outside of the very outside of each organ, we're going to have our serous membrane, and that's going to make up the outside. It's going to protect the organs. It's going to help hold them in place. And it's going to form part of the peritoneum, which is the membrane that surrounds the organs that are in the abdominal cavity. We talked about that in an earlier unit. All right, so if we have a quick look here, of course, the scale on this picture, we're going to start over here, which is going to be the biggest. And over here, when we get to the smallest, now we're talking about, microscopic. So first, let's have a look at a section through the wall of the small intestine. And if you look in this picture here, you can see these wavy lines that go down through the sides of the small intestine. Those wavy line structures are going to be the villi. Okay, and villi are like little tiny finger-like projections that stick out into the lumen of the organ. Now, this is the small intestine, and this is where the villi are the most well developed. So you can see the villi here are going to be made up of that mucous membrane on the outside. This is the first cell layer. So that area right there is going to be, this area and this area. That's all going to be the lumen. So the inside of the empty space inside the small intestine. If we look immediately inside that mucous membrane, so here's our mucous membrane here. If we look inside of our mucous membrane, the next thing we'll see is this layer of submucosa. That orange is not showing up really well. Let's go with green. That's going to be our submucosa. And the submucosa is going to be, the nerves and the blood vessels and all that stuff. You'll notice right here too that in that submucosa and in the mucosa, we've got lymph tissue. So That's going to be there to help protect us in case we have anything, in case we ingest anything that could cause us some harm. Immediately behind that submucosa, we're going to have our layer of muscles. So these are going to be circular and longitudinal muscles. There's 2 muscle layers there. And those are going to help with the peristalsis, moving food through the digestive system. And then the final layer is going to be the serous membrane, or we often call that the serosa. And that's the outside of the organ, and it makes up part of that membrane that surrounds all the organs inside the abdominal cavity. So if you think back a few units, when we talked about membranes, we talked about the peritoneum. So that's the serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity and forms the outer layer of the abdominal organs. Now, we talked about this when we talked about the placement of the heart as well. So the serous membrane is a double membrane, and the organ kind of gets stuffed into it so that the membrane wraps around it twice. Now, in this case, we're going to have we'll have the 2 layers of the membrane, the mesentery and the mesocolon. You guys don't necessarily need to worry about these particular terms or where they are. It's just to let you know or remind you of the way that these serous membranes fold around the organs to give that extra layer of protection. So in the next slide, I think it shows these membrane layers. Yeah. So let's have a quick look at the a picture down here first. So this is the way these membranes form. Remember, we get the visceral peritoneum. That's going to be the side of the membrane that actually touches the organs. We're going to get a space, and then on the outside we're going to have the parietal peritoneum. So just remember the way those organs fold, those membranes fold. It gives us a membrane that helps form the outside of the organ. It gives us a space, and then it gives us another membrane on the other side. So it's a lot of protection. If you look at the pictures up in this picture here, you'll notice the orange and the green layers. That's going to be consistent with the picture down here. So the orange layers up there are going to be the parietal peritoneum, and the green are going to be the visceral peritoneum. I'm not going to quiz you on this or anything like that. I just want to remind you the way that these membranes, are organized inside the cavities. Okay, so let's have a look at the parts of the digestive tract. Now, when I say digestive tract, we're talking about the hollow tube that goes from the mouth right through to the anus, okay? There's other parts that are involved in the digestive system, but when we talk about digestive tract, we're talking about, like I said, those organs that the food passed directly through. So we start most anteriorly, we'll have the mouth and the teeth, which play an important role in digestion. Right below that, we'll have the pharynx, which changes into the esophagus, which empties into the stomach. The stomach then empties into the small intestine, followed by the large intestine. Then we get through the rectum, the anus, and that's the exit point of the digestive tract. So remember, all of these structures that we're talking about here is the tract. That means they're going to be part of that hollow tube that the food will pass through. So let's have a look at each one of the functions of these. Start off with the mouth. So the mouth can often be called the oral cavity, and this is where food is going to enter, of course. So they're going to ingest food through the mouth. In the mouth, we're going to masticate, and masticate is the scientific word for chew. So we're going to chew up food, and when we chew food, we use our teeth, we use our tongue, we use our lips, we use our cheeks. There's lots of muscles that operate inside our mouth that help us masticate and make our food smaller. The idea behind mastication is it's called physical digestion. So we're physically breaking down the food, and we want to make as much surface area from that food as possible, which will allow digestion and absorption to happen much easier when it gets further along the digestive tract. So the mouth will move food in appropriate amounts. When you don't want to swallow everything you put in your mouth, you swallow a little bit at a time, and that'll push it to the back of the throat, to the pharynx, which we can then swallow. An important thing that happens when we're chewing, of course, is we have salivary glands in our mouth that will mix with the food, and that will help lubricate the food, as well as the enzymes that will start chemical digestion right there in the mouth. A very important part of our mouth, of course, is the teeth. Humans have two sets of teeth. We have a deciduous set and we have an adult set. So very often you'll hear the deciduous set called the baby teeth, and they'll start to fall out when we're quite young, anywhere between 5 and 6 or 5 and 10 years old, I guess. So when we're children, those will fall out and we'll start developing our adult teeth, which we'll have for our entire life. Now, we have different types of teeth for different functions. We have incisors, there's cuspids, premolars, and molars. In total, a normal healthy adult will have 32 teeth in 2 rows, the top 2 arches, the top arch and the bottom arch, so the maxilla and the mandible. And we'll see 8 incisors, 4 cuspids, and 20 molars, of course premolars and molars, in a normal healthy adult. So if we have a quick look at the placement and the anatomy of the teeth, this isn't something you guys need to worry about, but just be aware that the teeth play an important role in digestion. They're not just there for a pretty smile. But if we look at the different types of teeth, we get the 4 incisors that are the 4 front teeth, 4 up top, 4 on the bottom. Right behind that, we'll have the cuspids. They're sometimes called the canines. So we've got 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. Behind that, we'll have the premolars. So these are often called bicuspids. Those are those 2 there, and then there's 2 more on the bottom to here and here. And then we have the molars, which are the last 3 teeth on each arch. So that's a little bit marked up with the pen, a little bit confusing there, but you can see the layout of the teeth. Each tooth is embedded in a socket that we call an alveolus, and that's made up of bone. So you can see everything that I'm coloring in red here. That's going to be bone, and the teeth are connected by a ligament that attaches to the tooth and to the bone, and that holds the tooth in place. What you can see, the part that you can see the tooth is called the crown, and everything that's below what you can see is called the root. So that's a quick anatomy of the tooth. Like I said, you don't necessarily need to know this stuff, but it's good to remember that teeth play a very important function in digestion. Right behind the mouth is going to be the pharynx, and this is commonly referred to as the throat, okay? And this is going to carry food and liquids into the digestive tract system, and it's also responsible for carrying air into the respiratory tract. So we need to be careful when we're either swallowing or we're inhaling. Can't do both at the same time. We further divide the pharynx into 3 regions: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngeal pharynx. Now this is simply based on where we're talking about inside the back of the throat. The nasopharynx is going to be from the nasal cavity to the top of the roof of the mouth. The oropharynx is what would be visible if you open your mouth and look into the mirror. You'll be able to see the oropharynx. And then below the oropharynx, we're going to have the laryngeal pharynx. And this is where the pharynx extends right down into the larynx, where we get that the beginning of the cartilage for the voice box and so on. Now, when you swallow, the tongue will push back a small bit of food into the pharynx. And once it reaches the pharynx, we have a reaction, a reflex. We have involuntary responses that will, muscle contractions, which will move the food from the soft palate through the uvula, the back of the throat, into the oropharynx, and then down into the esophagus. The next tube there is the esophagus, and this consists of, it's a muscular tube that goes through the diaphragm, from the pharynx through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity. So once you swallow, the food comes from the pharynx. It's lubricated with the saliva that you had in your mouth when you were chewing, and it passes through the esophagus through those rhythmic contractions that we call peristalsis. Now, the esophagus doesn't aid in digestion at all, but it does take the food from the pharynx to the stomach, and that's where we're going to get our digestion starting to take place.